Hey everyone, welcome to the Amber May Show. I'm so glad you're here with me. Please like and subscribe and share this with others. I also want you to make sure you're hitting the links below in the description because we are being targeted. They don't want our voices heard. So who knows how long I'll be on this channel. I really don't know, but I do a lot more on the Rumble. I'm also transferring my videos to Odyssey, and I'm on Locals. I can do a lot more. I can say a lot more. And so if you want all that, click the links below to hear that. I also want to let you know that, hey, if you're looking for more money in retirement, like because the national average is like 10 years, you run out of retirement, I can help you have sustainable tax-free retirement. Or if you become ill or injured and need some money because, hey, you can't work, I can help you with that. And you can keep your household go with tax-free retirement with living benefits. And the program is super awesome for children. The younger they get started, the more money they get. So the link is in the description. A video of some of the highlights is in the description. So check that out. Now, I came across a sermon from Pastor Pawlowski, Arthur Pawlowski. He was one of the first pastors arrested in Canada. And he was incredible. He reminded me a lot of my dad. And so I want to kind of talk about some of the highlights that he shared with us, because I want to encourage you guys. You guys, we are winning, and we're only winning because people of courage are standing up. You know, if you have a bully in school that keeps picking on you, he won't stop until you stand up for yourself. That's when he will stop. Well, the same thing with government. Government won't stop taking from you until you stand up against them and say no more. It's sad because you can see the tactics in today's world of things that also were very powerful back in World War II times that made it countrymen against countrymen. Why were the Jews exterminated? I have no idea. What did they do to hurt anyone? As far as I can see, they didn't hurt anyone. They didn't do anything to hurt anyone. But yet they were the enemy. They were the them. It was us against them. And people would be tattling on their neighbors. It was a very scary time. And these people who did nothing got sent to concentration camps and were exterminated. It's super sad how that happened. And then you look at the soldiers and you look at the police officers who are there to protect the people. That's their first line of defense. And what was it? Oh, I'm just following orders. At some point, you have to take courage if you were called by God to serve in those capacities, to say that's an unjust law. I cannot enforce an unjust law. See, in the United States, we have the Constitution. And I'm getting, and I could be wrong, I don't know everything there is to know about the Canadian government, but what I do think I know, so feel free to correct me in the comments, is that they also have somewhat of a constitution in their country. And just like in America, they are afforded the freedom of religion. So if that's the supreme law of the land, that you are allowed to worship in any way you would like to, then nothing, no law that comes after that can supersede that. I don't care, pandemic or not. Here's the other thing I want to share with you guys. We're no longer in the middle or the beginning of the pandemic. Frankly, I think it's over. But of course, the media will not perpetuate that, because this whole thing was meant to bog us down. And now maybe I am crazy to think this, but maybe we're going to find out, and I could be wrong. And I really do hope I'm wrong. I just think this was all planned. I don't think this was by accident. There was just too many coincidences that happened. And I think they used COVID as a way to gain more power and control. Because people, Thomas Jefferson said this, people will give up liberty for safety. And they do it every single time. And if they feel threatened, they will give up their liberty because they want to be safe. And we saw a lot of manipulation with fear. And we know that anytime people uses fear to manipulate a way of doing things, it's terrorism. Basic definition. I'm using fear to coerce you to do what I want you to do. And it's a very powerful tool. Very powerful. So anytime that you are in law enforcement or military, and you might have this choice, maybe you're facing it right now, and I hope if you're a Canadian police officer listening to me, I'm not against you, I think highly of police officers. I really do. I have a great deal of respect. I know they have a hard job, and I know it is a calling by God. But if your government is telling you or forcing you or bringing out a law that is trying to supersede the supreme law of the land, then the supreme law of the land is what you should guide yourself with. The bottom line is you are there to protect and serve the people. You're the front line, the first defense of the people. And if your supreme law of the land says people have the ability to worship freely, then how dare you arrest pastors? Because the law that is subordinate to that, it should be thrown out. You cannot enforce that. And so we're going to be listening to Pastor Pawlowski talk about his little stint in getting arrested and what he went through. It's horrible. It's horrible. But I wanted to encourage you because he encouraged me. I listened to the whole sermon and he reminds me of my father. My father was a pastor too. And the only thing my dad cared about was what God thought of him. He didn't really care about anything else except what God thought of him. And so if my dad was a Canadian preacher, I know for a fact, and I have no doubt in my mind, he would have left his doors open in his church, even with COVID, and he would have ministered to the people who are brokenhearted, who have seen loved ones die, who have kids that want to commit suicide because they're locked in, or whatever the case would be. Scary time, people are worried about what's going on in the world, and he would be there and he'd have his church open and he'd minister to them because God's law is more supreme than man's law. And we see that time and time again in this thing called the Bible. And I'm going to put a link in the description for his sermon because it's fascinating. He talks about different people in the Bible. One thing he didn't talk about was Joseph, and I'll tell you about that in a second. But he talked about David going before Goliath when he was sent out to go give his brothers food who were at the battlefield. But the thing is, David was surprised. There was no battle going on. It was the people, God's people, cowered and scared because of these big giants that wanted to kill them. And I know, man, I get it now going through this whole year. I mean, I don't get it to the point they did, but I do get it that there's a lot of things that when you're going to be courageous about something, you're stepping into it's scary because you could get hurt. You could be thrown in jail. Someone could punch you in the face. Someone could turn you in. I mean, our president right now, the former vice president of the United States, he wants you to turn in your neighbor. That is like World War II stuff. Let your friends live their life. Live and let live. You live your life, let them live their life. What they do in their own life is not going to directly affect you. If you don't want to have anything to do with them, don't have anything to do with them. But to turn your fellow countrymen in is horrible. The media, the way they write stories, the way they talk, it's us versus them. These people, they're horrible. They're terrible. They're your fellow countrymen. They're not doing anything to hurt you. They're not trying to suppress you from doing anything you don't want to do. They're just trying to live their best life, and they feel that their government is not allowing them to live their best life. And that's a problem, because if the supreme law of the land allows you to worship freely and allows you to have free speech, then who are they to stop you from exercising those rights that the supreme law of the land gives you? Anything that goes against the supreme law of the land gets thrown out. I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is. It's the supreme law of the land that stops the government from stomping on the people. It's not the people stomping on the government. We've never had to worry about the people stomping on the government. In all of history, it's the government stomping on the people. You have people like Nero, an evil person like Nero. And if I'm wrong about my history, please correct me in the comments below. But I believe he was sleeping with his mother, and he decapitated people, and he'd put their heads on posts around his castle or something like that. He was insane. He was insane. Are we supposed to follow someone like that? Because the word of God says, thou shalt not murder. It doesn't say thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not murder, because there's times when you can justifiably kill someone if it's going to preserve your life. If it's someone's coming at you, trying to attack you, you have every right to protect yourself. So soldiers, they protect their country from foreign invaders. That is not against the Bible. that is totally justified. But for me to have hate in my heart, to want to do something and kill you, that is a sin. If I'm trying to protect myself from someone trying to attack me, that is not a sin. So it's against murder, not against killing. There's a difference, okay? Not that I want you to kill anyone, but there's a difference. So if God's law tells you you are to worship God on the Sabbath and keep it holy, and you should have no other gods before me, then sorry, government, you're out of line. And that's the thing some of the governments don't like. They don't want to answer to a higher calling. So not only that, but Daniel, and I want to read Daniel chapter 10 because something came up to me years ago, and I want to share it with you. But Daniel, no, it wasn't Daniel. It was Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. They had a law that was passed that when they heard this bell or this music, they had to, everyone, and I'm not just talking about that land, but I guess there was many lands, many people had to stop what they were doing and worship this golden image and bow down and worship him. And God's law says, there shall be no other gods before me. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego defied the law of man because it superseded, God's law superseded the law of man. Now, in Daniel chapter 10, it said, in the third year of King Cyrus, the king of Persia, a revelation was given to Daniel, and its message was true, and it concerned a great war. The understanding of the message came to him at a vision. And at the time, I, Daniel, mourned for 3 weeks. I ate no choice foods, no meat, or wine touched my lips, and I used no lotions at all until the 3 weeks were over. And on the 24th day of the first month, I was standing on the banks of the great Tigris River, and I looked up, and there before me was, this is an image of one of the angels that are in heaven. It's amazing. But if I saw this angel, I would be just as afraid as Daniel was. Get this. He looked up, and there before him was a man dressed in linen with a belt of the finest gold around his waist. His body was like chrysolite. His face was like lightning. His eyes like flaming torches. His arms and his legs like the gleam of brushed bronze. And his voice was like a sound of a multitude. Oh man, I'd have been terrified if I would have seen this angel. I, Daniel, was the only one who saw the vision, but the men with me did not see it, but such terror overwhelmed them that they fled and hid themselves. Have you ever been in a situation where like the hairs on the back of your head stand up? Like you just know something's there, but you can't see it, and it's kind of creepy. Well, that's what happened here. Okay, only Daniel got to see the angel, but they knew, they could sense there was some kind of presence, some kind of spiritual presence there. So then I heard him speaking, and I listened, and I fell into a deep sleep, and my face to the ground. And a hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. And he said, Daniel, you are highly esteemed. Consider yourself carefully the words I'm about to speak to you, and stand up, for I now have been sent to you. And when he said this to me, I stood up trembling, and he continued, do not be afraid, Daniel. Since the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I come in response to them. But the prince of Persia, I want you to listen to this. This is the part I want you to really listen to. But the prince of Persia, but the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me because I was detained there with the king of Persia. And I've come to explain to you what will happen in your people in the future, for the vision concerns a time yet to come. So when I was reading this a while ago, and this was years ago when I was working at the radio station, I used to have a radio station, and I often weekly had like shows, obviously, right? And this came to my mind. And God was telling me at this time that this prince of Persia, the kingdom of the prince of Persia, he's a demonic presence, and he's a very strong demonic presence. I just described to you what this angel looked like. This angel sounds extremely strong. His voice sounded like a multitude, but it took the highest prince. I love how the Bible calls these angels princes. So God called the highest angel there is, and it's Michael. He's the highest warrior. He's the highest prince. And he had to come and rescue this angel so the angel could give Daniel a message. That tells you how powerful. 21 days they were fighting in the heavenly realms just so Daniel would get this message. And so God was telling me that this prince of Persia, this kingdom is over a nation. And it's a very demonic, very strong, very powerful demonic kingdom that's over a nation. So I've been praying ever since. And God sets up times and places for just a time as this, like Esther, when she had to go before the king and she could have faced death. But her people, this wicked law came, and they tricked the king into doing this wicked law, and all her people were going to be annihilated. And so she had to go in front of the king. And the king already had killed his first wife, because the king's first wife, the queen, humiliated him in front of all his guests and was disrespectful. So he killed her, even though he really loved her. But that was the law, and he had to uphold the law. So she knew that the king killed his beloved first wife and didn't want to, but that's what the law commanded. So he did it. And so she had to face this king knowing that she could die because of this wicked law that he signed, and she had to talk to him about it. And the only time the queen could go before the king is if she was called to go before the king, or if he reached out a scepter and granted her permission to reach the throne. So she didn't know, was he going to give his scepter out and give her permission to approach the throne, or was he going to kill her for being insubordinate and coming out of place and time? Well, in her case, the king reached out a scepter. But back to Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, they wouldn't bow to this god made of statues. And so the law said that these men would have to be thrown in a furnace, a fiery furnace. And so they knew that the wages of this undermining the law was going to be death, but they feared God's law above the law of man. And wouldn't you know, there was a fourth man in the fire, and those men didn't burn, they didn't die. And they said, it looks like the Son of God is with them. And so the Son of God we know is Jesus. So Jesus appeared and protected those three men in the fiery furnace because they obeyed the supreme law, which is God's law. And in our case, the supreme law is also God's law, but it also is the Constitution, which is also based on God's law. And so then when they left the fiery furnace, they didn't even smell a fire. You know, when you sit by a fireplace, you smell your clothes, you smell like fire. They didn't even smell like fire. They didn't have one burn mark on them. And it was a miracle because the guy throwing him in the fire was killed just throwing him in the fire, because they raised the temperature up so high that just being near him killed that man, threw him in the fire. And so here the guys are in the fire, didn't die by the fire, didn't smell a fire, didn't have a torch of fire on them. And it changed the way that the king changed his laws. And Daniel did the same thing. He was thrown into lions, and it was a wicked law that was passed, and the king was tricked. And Daniel decided he was still going to pray, even though his law said you can only pray, or you can't pray, or something like that. I have to read the Bible again, but he wasn't supposed to pray, and he prayed anyways. And it was a very wicked law, because the law of God supersedes the law of man. And the law of man was trying to tell people you can't worship and you can't pray. And I applaud the people in California who were doing it anyways, who were worshiping out in the parks and stuff like that. Maybe they didn't go into a building, but they still gathered together and they worshiped and they defied that law of man. And I want to share with you this pastor that defied the law of man. And I want to share his story with you. And I'm going to put the link in the description. So I hope you'll read the whole thing, watch the whole thing.
And we're like, oh, devil, we'll kill you with it. So the devil from time to time shows up. He says, oh, you're picking a fight with me? And the church says, yes, we're picking a fight with you, you uncircumcised Philistine, you Fauci, uncircumcised Philistine. Yeah, we're picking a fight with you. Who do you think you are? You know, I pity them. Biden is like one leg on the other side of eternity, and he still is like, oh God, I'm going to kill you. No, you're walking dead, man. You just don't know it yet. I mean, how long does he have? Now, I'm not picking on those people. I'm just saying to you who they think they are. Those officers. You know why I yell at them on the pavement there? People don't know. When I was on my knees and anti-terrorists were putting the handcuffs behind, on me, he whispered to my ears and he says, "I'm going to charge you with resisting arrest." Seriously? Resisting arrest? Unbelievable, you little devil. So what I said to him, taser me or shoot me. It doesn't look very good on video because people don't have the background. And then when they took me to the paddy wagon, he said, he throws me, like this, backwards, and the police vehicle was so short, I was not fitting in. So my feet were sticking out, like up to here. And those two police officers are debating, what do we do? He's not fitting in. No, I was not fitting in, sorry. It's just impossible. So they are pushing, I'm thinking they're going to break my legs. I had to help them out somehow. Obviously they're not trained properly in these circumstances. And then he turns to me and he says, "I'm going to charge you with assaulting a police officer." You see, you gotta understand who you're dealing with. I don't call them Nazi, Gestapo, communist, fascist, because I run out of other names. I could call them hypocrites and whitewashed tombs, and there is a whole list of names that Jesus used. I call them Gestapo because they're acting like Gestapo. Yes, it's true they're not shooting us dead yet, but if we will let them continue to do what they're doing right now, there will be concentration camps and they will start shooting people dead. That's history. You don't have to be very clever, you don't have to be very smart. Just read history books. I teach history. It's a fascinating topic. It teaches you everything. If you don't put a check on those wannabe tyrants, they will keep taking until you have nothing left. Evil never stops. Evil needs to be stopped. The giant, Goliath, is in front of the army of God and he's mocking them. He's laughing at them for 40 days, in the morning and in the evening. Right now we have 15 months of this ongoing mocking of the church. I'm not sure about America, but in Canada, abortion clinics are open throughout all of this time. You can murder children, no problem. Marijuana stores, because they legalized it, it's open throughout all of this time. Liquor stores are open. Walmarts, Safeways, Costco's, IKEA's. I was arrested for inciting people to come to church. That's what I do. I ask people to come to church. And I'm not hiding it. And then, of course, for preaching in the church illegally. I cannot have 100 people in the church. But I can take all of you here and half of the neighborhood to IKEA. At the door it says only 480 people allowed.
Does that make any sense to you? Why we could go to Walmart and shop? We could go kill our babies. We could go get high. We could go here. We could go there. But God forbid we go to church.
Only. Our politicians, wannabe tyrants, said that you're not allowed to have your brother in your house for coffee. Because if you do, we're going to send the police and you will be arrested. During the Christmas time, the politicians, federal, provincial, and municipal came and they said, we're canceling Christmas. We're canceling Christmas. I said publicly in front of the reporters, I said, I'm canceling you. You're useless. You are unessential services, you devils. And I invited the whole neighborhood to come to the biggest Christmas celebration in the country. And lots of people showed up, including 100 police officers, 52 police cars, anti-terrorists. We were videotaped pictures, so I ended up with 11 COVID tickets. Someone says to me, I'm jealous, because by the time this is over, you're going to be able to plaster your entire house with a nice, colorful tickets. So I said, join me, and I'll share it with some of them with you. The Goliath stands in front of the church, and yeah, he's flexing his muscles, just like Fauci, tough guy. Just like those politicians want to be tyrants. But let me just tell you what this whole thing is all about. God has given you an opportunity to stand up and be a man, to stand up and be a woman of God. Like Esther did. If I perish, I perish. Mordecai said to her, for such a time as this is such a time. We have been raised for such a time as this. David understands something that 99% of the Christians these days do not understand. If God is for me, who can be against me? Greater is he that is in me than the one that is in them. He hath trained me well. When I fought the lion, when I fought the bears, he preserved my life for such a time as this. How many of you have testimonies? If I would ask you, do you have a testimony that God did something miraculous in your life, something amazing in your life? Right? So he did it yesterday. You think he's not capable of doing it again today?
I want to share with you a testimony that God did for me. And I know this is a pretty long episode, but I think it needs to be said. This pastor, you need to hear his whole sermon. It was incredible. He's from Poland, and the whole thing was incredible. But me and him have something kind of similar in common. And I'm tearing up as I'm hearing his story, because his story was so similar to mine. Both of our stories involve babies, our babies. And both of our stories involved us hating God so much and saying awful things to God. And both of our stories have a similar experience as we navigated through it. So I've had a total of 4 miscarriages. But my story, this part of my story is with my 3rd miscarriage. And, I was raised in church, and my dad was a preacher. And so, I didn't know anything different but going to church. And I knew God could help me. He could give me a baby if he wanted to, or he didn't have to, that's his choice. And so because I knew it was his choice, whether he was going to save my baby or not, or whether he was going to give me a baby or not, it hurt so bad, because with my 3rd miscarriage, it was growing in my fallopian tube. This was my first baby that was actually growing, and I was so hurt that my baby was growing in my fallopian tube instead of the uterus that God made for the baby to grow. And it devastated me. It devastated me because I finally had a baby, and I asked the physician, I'm like, can you please take a picture of my baby? And it looked like a little teeny tiny little baby. The head, the eyes, the hands, the feet looked like a teeny tiny little baby. For the first time, I got to see a picture of what my baby looked like. It was devastating because I was so angry. Why did it have to grow in my fallopian tube? And it ruptured my fallopian tube until my life was on the line. It was go time. I had to go into emergency surgery. I woke up super sick. I couldn't even move, and I literally couldn't move. I was in so much pain. I don't know if you've ever been in pain where you're doubled over and you cannot move. I was in so much pain, and I already had a hard time having babies, so I knew that losing a fallopian tube would lower my fertility a little bit, and that was devastating to me. And then it was devastating. I was finally having a growing baby, and it was growing in the wrong spot. And the whole thing was horrible. It was just a horrible situation. And after that, I hated God so much. I hated him so much. I stopped going to church. I hated, the hate. I'd have conversations and said, I'd never pray to you again. And I don't remember specifically calling him names, but it wouldn't put past me that I did. And so I literally stopped going. And I have no idea whatsoever what got me in this church for this night. And it was Good Friday. And Good Friday is the day that Christians go to church, because that's the day Jesus is going to die on the cross. And so you read this story, the Passion of Christ, that story where, he's in Gethsemane, and then he's crying because he's scared. He doesn't want to die. He knows, because he's God and he's man all in one. He knows what's going to happen. And the man part of him doesn't want to go through what the God part of him needs him to do. And the Bible said that he was beat so badly you couldn't even recognize him. The beating he took was so bad you couldn't even recognize him. And not only that, but he was completely naked. It was the most humiliating thing he'd ever gone through, and he did nothing wrong. He was innocent. There was not one law he broke. He was all perfect. He was the perfect citizen, literally, and he could be because he was God. And so here's this innocent man dying a horrific death that he shouldn't have died because he did nothing wrong. Sounds like the Jews in World War II. I don't know what they did that was so bad that caused them to all be exterminated. But anyways, so I'm in the service and we're learning about this. And God spoke to me in that moment, because I kept asking him, like, why? Why are you doing this? I wanted him to tell me why he took my third baby, why he couldn't just give me this child. I've gone through 3 miscarriages. Isn't that enough? I already hurt. Like, he wouldn't answer me. And it made me even more angry why he wouldn't answer me. And then he said to me, and this pastor had a very similar experience, so I'd love you to pay attention to around minute 30 on this video. And he said to me, would I have gone through everything on the cross just to hurt you? And to you, it's not a big deal that he said that to me, because you weren't in that place. Or maybe maybe those words mean something to you. I don't know. But it meant everything to me. And I started weeping, because nothing and nobody could fix that place in my heart that was so broken. And if you've ever lost a child, then you understand that brokenness that you can't ever 100% get over, right? Can't. Even if you know your kid's in heaven. I know my dad's in heaven. I know my best friend's in heaven. I know my uncle's in heaven, but I know my children are in heaven, but I'm not with them. So that separation is horrible. And so if you've ever been in that situation, then you can kind of get where I'm at. And he said, would I have gone through all the pain of the cross just to hurt you? And in that moment, my heart started healing, and I was very ashamed of how I felt. And I was very ashamed of my attitude. And it's like God forgave me in that moment. And God healed that broken piece that God didn't wish that my children died. He wasn't doing it on purpose. I live in a sinful world with a broken body that doesn't work. And could he have? Yes, he could have. I don't know the plan and purpose of losing 4 babies has. But the Bible tells us he's going to turn everything for our good. And so somehow he's going to use my 4 beautiful babies, and he's going to use it for somebody's good. Does it still I think that I get triggered, when I hear of other parents losing their children, because the pain is always going to be there, but the anger is gone. It's gone. Why should I be so angry anyways? They just circumvented this whole horrible earth that's full of a lot of pain and full of people that are trying to control you. And full, there's death on this earth, and it's sad, and people hurt you a lot, and it's sad. I mean, there's joy on this earth. Don't get me wrong. Of course we experience that. That's why we want to keep living. But my kids avoided all that, 4 of them. And my dad now knows his grandchildren that he never got to meet. He got to see them. And I was watching the movie based on the story of that kid who went to heaven, came back. And he told his mom that he met his sister. She had a miscarriage, his sister's. And it gave me hope too, that like I'll get to see my 4 babies someday. And that's kind of cool. My best friend got to meet them. Anyway, so we have a similar experience. He actually had a living baby that was dying, a slow death. And you got to hear his story. It's incredible. But that's what I want to share with you today. I hope that you realize that it's time for you to take courage and start standing up against laws that go against the supreme law of the land and that go against God's supreme laws. And we can't stand for that anymore. And it's going to take courage because it's scary. We're going against the uncircumcised Philistine. We're going against the Goliaths. They have so much power and so much control that you and I, as little people, there's no way, unless God's hand was in it, could we defeat them. It's not possible. If you did the math on a piece of paper, they outpower us and have too much money, and there's no way we could defeat that. But God reigns supreme. And my Bible showed me time and time again when God's people were in a place where there was tyranny or wicked rulers, God sent some people to rescue his people. And I think now is the time that the world is going to be needing rescuing from. People just love power and money, and they don't really care about the rest of us, that we're human beings that are valued by God. I don't want the media to think that you and I are enemies, because you're valued, because you're created by God. You're valuable. And I hate that us versus them, because there shouldn't be an us versus them. Let live. Why can't I live? What I do is not affecting your life. You can do what you want. Whatever you want to do in your home, do in your home. However you want to live your life, live your life. I'm not here to be the dictator of your life. So why are you trying to dictate on my life? Do what God asks you to do, and do what pleases God. That's what I was going to say, because if my dad was in Canada preaching, he would just be like Arthur Pawlowski, and he'd be arrested too, because there's no way he would have closed his church down. And he didn't in Phoenix when he was with the orders and everything. But again, at least the governor recognized the freedom of religion, and he didn't even dare to mention that religious places need to be closed. He didn't even dare say that, but some states did, and some countries are too. But he left his doors open at his church when other churches closed their doors. And I'm glad my dad didn't get arrested. But had he lived in Canada, I know for sure he would have, because what my dad cared most about in this world was, what does God think of him? And that's how he lived his life, is, what does God think of me? And now he is with the one thing that he loved the most. And I want to be happy for him, because he's with the God that he loves so much. But Father's Day is in a couple days, and I don't have my dad. But at least I know he's with the God that loves him. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Take care.